Hello all and welcome to the Web Performance Working Group. This is being recorded and will be posted online. And on the agenda today, we mostly have a bunch of issues we wanted to discuss. But before we get to that, I just realized today that the next call will be on a holiday here, so I won't be able to make it. So then the question is, like, can we move the call to be on Wednesday, the May 12th? So one day before the scheduled time. Would this work for everyone? Or alternatively, we could also skip the next call, as the agenda has been somewhat light, but I don't know, there are a couple of like somewhat heavier topics that are like, we want to discuss, but I don't know if they'll be ready to be discussed in 2 weeks. So what do you all think? Would a day earlier work for everyone here? Okay, I don't hear any loud objections. So let's say, yeah, we'll move it to a day earlier. And if there are significant conflicts, we could discuss this over the mailing list. Okay. Cool. So otherwise, yeah, let's dive into the issues. Maybe I can. Yeah, it's blink on, but there is, yeah. Yeah, it will definitely be in a different time zone that will require some adaptations, but yeah, I think it will be fine. Okay, so let me try to present. Issues. Can you all see my screen?
Yep.
So, yes. Okay, so let's start with a proposal. So a couple weeks ago, we talked about a proposal to expose render blocking information to resource timing. This is another proposal I made more or less at the same time, which similarly I thought I made years ago, but then failed to find any like specific issues that I filed. Currently, with resource timing, we have the initiator type information, which is very weird and doesn't provide a ton of information. And something that would be useful on top of it is a specific initiator. So in DevTools, for example, we have linkability from a resource to the resource that requested it. Often also to a specific line. If, for example, a resource is triggered by HTML, DevTools can often tell you what specific line in the HTML actually triggered that resource request. And I don't know if we need line-by-line attribution, but it would definitely be helpful from my perspective to add initiator information that maybe alongside some concept of a fetch ID or links to a resource timing entry will enable us to create dependency trees from RAM data. So we'll be able to know that script A triggered script B that triggered script C that triggered an image load. And if that image has triggered like is uncompressed or triggered excessive processing or whatnot, that would be something that we'll be able to trace back and pinpoint to script A that loaded it and say to the person responsible for script A, hey, this is your fault. Whether script A's author is someone else on our team or a third-party provider. So that is essentially, my pitch for this new feature proposal for resource timing. And I'm wondering, what do y'all think about that? Does that sound like something that will be useful from your perspective? Is this something that, for example, CDN providers can use to, an idea I had in the past was to use that kind of information in order to, figure out long dependency chains and then potentially flatten them using preload. Is this something that you all think that you'd use?
Personally, I would find it very helpful. Actually, I think it would be even more useful if it would be like the dev tools when it actually shows the actual call tree, the stack traces, or even change stack traces. The problem with that might be security or privacy. So I wonder how we can, what are the implications for that? But in terms of usefulness for diagnostic and determining performance issues, I find it useful if it can be implemented.
Yeah, I think that it might be interesting to tie that to the JS profiling proposal in some way. So when JS profiling is enabled, then maybe we can provide more initiator data in those cases, but I haven't really given it a ton of thought. So, but yeah, I would. Yeah, but from that perspective, I would tie it to the same security primitives that self-profiling had. So if we are able to expose that information from a JS profiling perspective, maybe we can do the same for initiator. I guess the main difference is that profiling would be an opt-in, where initiator is something that we would want to be enabled for everyone ideally, but maybe, yeah. Anyway, yeah, it definitely is an interesting angle to think of, and I will try to give it some more thought. Thanks.
Hey, Yoav, I have a question. What about when you have a service worker involved and multiple tabs open, requesting similar, resources? How can we organize this mess when you have this situation?
So in this case, we're talking about the render-based initiator or the service worker as an initiator?
Yeah, in this case, I think the service worker would be handling all the, the fetch events, but that could be initially triggered by some resource, I don't know, in the page that requested. So service worker is intercepting. Would this be opaque or transparent? I don't know. I'm still understanding how would that be helpful.
That's a good question. I don't know if the way that I I would imagine us having this initiator info be attached to the request object in fetch. And then if the service worker is generating a new request object, then the service worker becomes the initiator. instead of the original renderer-based one. But this is all like I'm making stuff up. So I would love for you to be involved in those discussions to see how we define this. It's definitely more complex than just, let's add initiator information. It will be great. Like, there are a lot of edge cases to think of. But yeah, the service worker one is definitely something we'll need to take into consideration. Yeah.
Yeah, because currently with service worker, I already have enough problems trying to identify where does the resource come from, especially multiple tabs, and we don't have an ID, and it's hard to precisely map without an ID. But an ID definitely would help in this case for both situations. But yeah, I'll keep this in mind and have this consideration.
Yeah. Do you know what DevTools for various browsers currently do in this case?
Not really, because DevTools is I have this when I'm debugging, I have the dedicated DevTools for service worker, and in there it's kind of tough. Like what I see more in the RUM situation when I have multiple clients IDs, and yeah, but I'll keep this in mind. But I'm not very sure how we can map one to the other. But interesting situation.
Yeah, if you can outline your use case on this issue so that we won't forget about it when we'll actually go ahead with doing something about it, that would be awesome.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Hey, Doc, would you consider preload an initiator?
I'm sorry, I didn't really get that. It was a bit noisy audio-wise.
Oh, I'm sorry. Can you hear it now a little bit better?
A bit, yeah.
Would you consider preload an initiator that you would start? Would that be a root on these? Or how does that work in this?
Yeah, so for preload, yes, I would definitely consider that the initiator, and that so there's HTML-based preload, and for that I will consider the the HTML the initiator of that preload, and tie that back to the if we have line by line attribution, tie that back to the link rel preload line that kicked that off. For HTTP header-based preloads, I would still consider the resource that delivered the initiator. Line by line attribution here would be tough, but maybe we can just say headers in that case or something along those lines. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, I like the idea of being able to pick apart where the preload request came from. So I feel like any tool or light you can shed on that with this, the better.
Cool.
Yeah, maybe if I can highlight another specific use case. So when you have an app that has lots of third-party resources, which you actually don't own, a lot of time they're initiating requests for resources, and it's hard to troubleshoot what caused. Even though you can see those resources requests on the resource timing, you don't always know where they're coming from and what triggered them. So it would really help to diagnose those cases.
Yeah. This is very much the use case I have in mind for this.
Oh, sorry, I didn't read the...
No, but it's fine. But yeah, I'm glad to hear that I'm not alone in this. So thank you.
Yeah.
It'd be similar to what Simon Hearn's request map can do with synthetic, but actually being able to do that from RUM would be really awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, from Akamai's point of view, I think this kind of information would be helpful for a lot of the things that we do. Obviously, from the RUM perspective, we try to do some of this heuristically, or even just when we're looking at waterfalls and stuff like that to try to point things out for customers. But having a more definitive answer to what triggered what would definitely allow us to point more, as you say, like to, I don't know, assigning blame is maybe too harsh of a term, but like to figure out what the biggest hitters are.
Yeah.
The edge itself could make more intelligent decisions to deliver content in different ways. And I also was thinking from a security perspective, if eventually you look back and you find rogue requests going out to security products, may be interested in being able to find the root cause of that kind of exfiltration or whatever it's doing. So not just from a performance point of view, but I think it shining the light on what triggered what enables all sorts of things that we haven't even really thought of here, as long as we can do it in a safe, secure way, right?
Yeah. Cool. Yeah, that's like the security angle is definitely interesting as well, to be able to catch those kinds of exfiltration attempts in the wild, especially maybe tied together with like report only CSP. If you have CSP that reports suspicious activity, and then you can tie that back with the RUM report to figure out where that suspicious activity started and which third party was responsible for that. That's assuming a third party.
Yep.
Yeah. Cool.
I think another point also is the extension. If an extension started the request, that might be worth exposing, but of course, not showing which extension caused that, so to not track what user has installed.
Yeah, I don't know what, like, yeah. I'm not sure that like we will have, like, how would we expose scripts from another world in that case?
Yeah, because if a known resource is, let's say, is known for I don't know, a screen reader or something to inject, so people can track that. If I see that, I know the person has this extension installed. So there might be some privacy concern here.
Yeah, there may be some privacy concerns. There may also be, just like from an implementation perspective, like there is no, like if we are pointing to previous resources as the initiators, an extension is not really a previous resource. So yeah, it's definitely an interesting case to think about. I don't know whether we can actually define it, but yeah, it definitely interesting to keep that in mind. It's also like possible, like going back to the security case, I'm not sure that we can always have attribution to the actual initiator. So for example, if we have a script that is setting off a timeout that is then fetching something, I'm not sure that this is attribution information that we actually, like the browsers actually keep. So there may be loopholes in the security story. But yeah, it's interesting to keep that use case in mind and then see if we can tackle it or not, or maybe we can only tackle non-sophisticated attackers, but yeah.
Okay.
I will, like, +1 to the extension case. In RUM data, we see requests triggered by extensions, right? And our customers often ask, like, what's going on here? Why do I see this request to this weird domain that I don't recognize? And they go to that page, and that doesn't happen to them unless they happen to be that user with that extension in it, right? So even if it was just a very simple attribution or a pointer to like something outside of the page triggered it, you know, or something, just to kind of lock that in a bit more. Because it's caused confusion for sure with run data. It shows up in resource timing, right? Those
Yeah.
Many of those extensions trigger fetches that show up in resource timing.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's like, it would probably be safe to say that this is like triggered by an extension without saying anything more about that. Like, I don't know if this covers everything, but it will, yeah, it will help the case of like, why is this request here?
Yep.
Yeah. Cool. Anything else on that front? Okay, so thanks all for the great feedback and great use cases. It's definitely, yeah. I suspect that there's a lot of value in this that we'll be able to unlock, but it's definitely critical to think of the various use cases that this should or shouldn't cover, and the edge cases that will trip us up, hopefully beforehand. Okay, so moving on to the next issue. Yeah, I don't know that this is super actionable here on the call. I was hoping that W3C folks would be here, but essentially we need to, yeah, we need to set up auto publishing, and in terms of the references, yeah, having those two references is apparently, like, references to resource timing and resource timing 2 apparently tripped up Bike Shed. So it's something that we would, yeah, something that we would want to tackle relatively shortly, but I don't know if this is super actionable, so maybe we can move on to the next one, unless someone has strong opinions about those references in respec. Yeah, just like on that front, I think that we'll be able, like the new spec prod GitHub repo that I need to figure out and deploy, but I think that it offers a great way to build respec specifications to avoid the situation we had in the past where the spec is, is published, but then later on breaks. So I think that it will enable us to have stable specs with build time. But build time is part of the PR process that will break in case something new in respec broke, but breaks as part of the publishing process and not later on at some arbitrary point in time. So I'm hopeful on that front. Okay. And with that, we can talk about performance timeline. Sean, do you wanna talk about this one?
Sure. Yeah. So, so the context was for performance event timing. Basically, we just we always buffer the timing entries that have duration greater than 104, I think, and that list will grow indefinitely. So the issue becomes like whether the UA should be able to clear the entry buffers at some time, like because old entry buffers, like I don't know, days old entry buffers are probably not going to be helpful anymore. And I think this applies to other performance timings as well.
Okay, yeah. So we have clearing capabilities and like buffer limits for resource timing, but that proved to be an anti-pattern in terms of multiple scripts on the page that step on each other's toes and clear the buffers and preventing other scripts on the page from doing what, like from collecting that data. But here, if I understand it correctly, you're asking for something else, basically allowing the UA to clear entry buffers if they've been collected but then did nothing, right?
Yeah.
So the event timing interface, we have a max buffer size in the registry that we say of 150. So it's not unbound, right? Are you just worried about like really, really old entries not being useful? Or are you worried about it?
Do we have a limit for event timing? I'm not too sure.
Yes, we do.
Oh,
I mean,
do?
I can explain the logic behind it a little bit. So the main reason for having the buffers is to get data from early in the page load. So while scripts have not yet injected their performance observers, right? So the idea is that the buffers should be sufficient to capture the initial data from the page. We made them, I mean, the buffer limits are somewhat arbitrary in that we didn't do extensive investigation to figure out what's the right length that generally guarantees that they will be good by then, but it should be like sufficiently good. And then once the buffer is full, it doesn't really keep increasing in size. The assumption is that your performance observer is going to be installed by then. Sorry, so there's no need to keep new entries in any buffer, since like if you don't listen to it, then like that's kind of the idea behind it. The only one that has unbounded buffers, as far as I'm aware, is user timing, and the reason for that one is that it is a very developer explicit signal when they call performance.mark or performance.measure. So we decided that, I mean, they still need to be kept because you need to support get entries by name, for example. So they need to be kept by the browser for that reason. And those don't have a buffer size limit.
Yeah, so for cases like user timings, do we think that we should be able to clear the entries at some point? Because I'm just not too sure, like if the entries had been in the buffer for like a couple of days, then.
So I don't know what do you mean by we? The user agent or the web developer?
The browser.
The browser.
I think that runs a risk of like violating developer expectations on that front. Although I would like, I don't know if developers are collecting old user timing buffered entries, you know, from days ago, but they might and they can. And is the advantage like like memory reduction related? Like what's the
yeah, the main concern was for the memory usage.
Just a quick question. Is this hypothetical concern, or have you seen cases where we are storing too much information, too much data from the performance timeline?
Okay, yeah. So I was thinking event timing, but since we have a limit for that, maybe it's not an issue raised. I guess I was just very concerning about the. But when I was filing the GitHub issue, I was also thinking like user timings.
Right.
I guess we have seen cases like user timing took lots of memory in Firefox. Especially, I think it was for Facebook. I can't recall exactly.
That sounds yeah, because Facebook also had the issue on user timing where they basically wanted it for DevTools purposes and not for real reporting, which aligns with creating many entries, I guess. It's a shame they're not on the call today. I think it might have been interesting
I have
to
some
also,
context there.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, I don't remember if they still do this, but they would fire user timing events and then immediately clear them from the perf timeline. This would create in Chrome trace events, and the trace events don't get cleared, and so DevTools would pick it up and show it in the timeline. So this was a way to add UI to the DevTools timeline, but they didn't actually care about having them persist. Matter of fact, they didn't want them to persist in the perf timeline. So they were explicitly clearing user timing events, and I don't know if that's supposed to remove them from buffers, but that was the pattern that they were using.
I mean, I think it should remove them from the buffer, right? Like, perhaps that is the problem in Firefox.
But they use lots of timers that probably they do persist in the timeline as well. So the use case we're describing is their debug usage, like more advanced timing that's just for DevTools. They probably also have plenty, and for long-lived Facebook sessions, I imagine it does get actually long, like non-cleared ones.
Okay, so yeah, so essentially for, yeah, I think that makes sense. So we have for all entries, we have buffer limits other than user timing, where we have clear marks and clear measures that clear specific entries. So developers can use that to clean up those marks and measures for long-lived apps, either because they just want the DevTools annotation, or because they have collected those marks or measures, sent them over to the server, they're no longer relevant, they can be cleared, I guess, from the buffer. So that seems like something that would, yeah, address the developer concern. I don't know. Yeah, I don't know if this addresses the user agent concern. Sean, like, is
yeah, I guess that's fine, because I was mainly concerned event timing.
okay.
And I think with the go ahead, Michael.
No, it's a different question, so go ahead.
Oh, it was just really quick. I was saying, so we do have the event types registry, and we have the max buffer sizes, as Nicholas pointed out there, and we can change them, right? I mean, we can choose if they are too small or too egregious. We could aim to tweak them over time, and you know, as we need. So, I mean, if any of those buffers seem like we're wasting too much memory, it's not going to be used, like, we could certainly take that into consideration and consider lowering it or increasing it, like we did for resource timing, because we found that resource timing was not sufficient enough to capture, 10-15% of web page loads.
Oh yes, and that reminds me, we should implement the number dropped entries, which I specified, but have yet to ship in Chrome. So thanks for that reminder.
I'm going to be talking about it in our Lazy Load conference, Nicholas. So better get implemented by then.
Yeah, and that would enable us to know if our limits are too small, basically. So
yeah.
Okay, Michael?
Yeah, so my question, I guess, is a good follow-up to this, which was, it sounds like the intention of the buffer is less to be sort of like a circular ring buffer and more just the bootstrapping. You only want the first whatever so that you can late register observers, which makes sense. However, if you haven't registered your observer in time, the buffer now hits its limit, and it's like many days later, there are many dropped entries. You have a huge hole in the perf timeline. This recording is quote unquote tainted at this point. Is it still worth keeping those buffered entries around in those cases? Like if you haven't registered your observer, read from it by the time it's full, it almost is worthwhile to just clear it at this point, perhaps. You know, I don't know, maybe the first couple drop entries, that's debatable, but to Sean's point, like, is it really necessary to keep it around forever? That's perhaps a question.
I can talk about resource timing specifically because we've come across this a bunch, right? So it was originally 150 entries, and amongst our customers, they would often find their waterfalls that we present to them to be not fully representative of what they thought their page load experience was. And we found that in some of our customer sites, we needed to manually bump that buffer size up to 250 or 300, or we would just tell them 10,000 or whatever they want, so they don't have to worry about it. Having at least a partial result was more valuable than having no results, which is kind of an even scarier thing, or more concerning thing, or you don't know why kind of thing. So my preference, at least for like from that one use case for resource timing, would to still be to present the whatever you captured and say how many you dropped. Like that's even more information that would be good. I mean, again, like I do understand the browser's concern here about not being a memory hog, but for that particular
I just wonder
use case,
if you could drop a whole bunch of timeline data from a bunch of other pages that are likely no longer useful, would you have more room for the current buffer, perhaps? Like, presumably, if you have a fixed amount of memory you're willing to allocate to this globally.
Yeah, I do think if we start playing with heuristics here, it's gonna get really confusing for developers and analytics providers. Like, of course, we can keep discussing, but something to keep in mind is that adding this kind of heuristic might cause issues, right, to like people that are actually looking at the data. So.
Yeah, there's a definite trade-off here between memory utilization and consistency. And yeah, I because those buffers are bound to what seems like reasonable values, I wouldn't expect that dropping them would gain you a ton of memory, especially for long-lived apps. But maybe, like, you know, I don't have any data on that. It's just a hunch. So
yeah, I think with in the absence of num dropped entries, having predictable fixed numbers for the size of the buffer is important. But I wonder if that's something that does need to be consistent if you just hide the data. And therefore, like, you can imagine, like, it seems like these were somewhat arbitrarily picked anyway. And so if there is room to allocate more, why not allocate more? If there's no longer room to allocate what's been allocated, why not clear them? But anyway, I wonder, Sean, if your questions were addressed at this point.
Yeah.
cool. Yeah, any last comments on this, or shall we move on? Okay, so moving on to preload. exciting because it's been a while. Yeah, let me share the issue. I have a couple of issues. The first one is allow HTTP headers to be defined for the preload request. So this is an interesting issue that I think we talked about many years ago as part of like fetch parameters. But essentially what the Angular folks here are trying to do is they are trying to preload fetch requests that are being sent later. Those fetch requests are being fitted with custom accept headers, basically changing their accept headers to indicate that they prefer JSON over XML from various REST API endpoints. Because of those custom accept headers, right now preload, like the unspecified preload cache in Chromium, and I believe in WebKit as well, doesn't match those requests. And when they are later sending calling fetch, they are triggering a second request. That is actually the desired behavior here, because if the preload cache were to match this like requests with different accept headers, like requests with different accept headers can have different responses, and matching them in the cache seems wrong. So the preload cache behavior here seems correct, even though it's not specified. But the problem here is that there is no way for them to preload those requests without them triggering a double download. And ideally, what they would like is an attribute on preload that enables them to say, okay, this is the value for the accept header, or maybe something even more generic than that, that enables them to set any arbitrary headers on that request in order to make sure that it matches with whatever is fetched later on. And I'm like, on the one hand, I think that the use case is legit. At the same time, I'm concerned about adding cruft to HTML. I know that in the past we talked about adding a JSON, like fetch options attribute to various elements that load resources, so that developers are able to like specify a JSON with the various fetch options that they want applied to this resource request, and then we would have been able to use that for, to define new headers or define many other, fetch parameters, credential mode, whatnot. At the same time, like I said, I'm concerned about adding arbitrary cruft here. And there's definitely a trade-off here between HTML legibility and the usefulness of preload for those use cases. So I'm wondering what you all think. I pinged Anna and Catherine on the issue, and okay, I see that you followed up. And that is, ideally this follows from destination, so that's not like the accept headers do follow from the destination, but not like that doesn't apply for custom accept headers. And this is the case here, so I should have replied to Anna on this, and I failed because I'm bad at email. Essentially, I wonder, what do y'all think? Is this like, first of all, if like, is this a case you've encountered? And what do you think of the trade-off here between like adding attributes that would define, like better define those request parameters to HTML? Any thoughts on that front? Okay, that's fair. Yeah, I guess if there's no one with strong opinions, we can continue the discussions on the issue itself. From the silence, I'm also guessing no one has strong objections to adding those kind of attributes to link elements. Okay. Cool. So yeah, I will take an action item to continue the discussion on the issue, and we'll see where we get there. And finally, the last issue on today's agenda is for preload and picture. So essentially, when using picture to load new and exciting image formats that are not yet supported everywhere, we currently have a way to use the type attribute in order to just preload the latest one. And that worked well when WebP was the new kid in the block, and folks were interested in just preloading the latest one and supporting browsers, and the type attribute gave us that. But if we are interested in preloading more than just the latest format, so for example, nowadays we have AVIF that is making progress in terms of support in some browsers, and then people are now interested in loading, like preloading AVIF and WebP, and people are starting to play around with the JPEG XL support, and it's becoming somewhat more of a problem. Like people are interested in preloading multiple types, but I guess just the best one that is supported from all those separate, from all those different types. So people are interested in being able to say, okay, I want you to preload this AVIF. If you don't support AVIF, preload this WebP. If you don't support this WebP format, preload a JPEG or something along those lines. And that is, like, in the past, we somewhat avoided from tackling this use case because it didn't seem like it had a ton of real-life implications. And the support metrics for newer formats were somewhat similar to the support metrics for preload, so it didn't seem like there's a real-life concrete use case. But with AVIF and more common preload support, it seems like there is now a case to add that kind of a mechanism. And I'm wondering if folks have opinions on what that may look like.
Do you kind of want to have a way to tie multiple preloads together? And
yes, and the problem there is that we cannot really add a new element that will cover multiple, like we can't add a link picture element that will control multiple elements that are contained inside it, because we can't add new elements to the head. And and we can't use link for that, because link is not, like, theoretically we could have a link rel many links and then have multiple links inside of that, but link is self-closing, so we can't have it contain multiple.
if they all shared some sort of common ID or something, I don't know.
Maybe, yes. That would be one way of doing that, but I'm not sure that the processing model for that would be reasonable, because what happens when you have 3 of them in the head and then a last one that arrives, like, other than, no, but we could figure out something where, yeah, they would still, like, we would still take the order into account, and people will have to put the latest and greatest first. And then if you already encountered that ID, you ignore the preload or something along those lines. But yeah, maybe taking a step back, what do folks think about the use case? Is that a reasonable one for us to tackle? Is this something that you've encountered, something that would have helped you in some case, or not? Yeah, I know that we had similar requests in the past also for something similar for fonts that we similarly dismissed with everyone just support WAF2, so there's no need for that. But with progressively rendered fonts and other advancement in the world of web fonts, we may want, like, the same mechanism would be potentially useful for both. Yeah.
I guess I have a dumb question. Why can't you have rel equals preload inside picture element sources? Does that just make no sense, or?
So preload typically is something you would put before the picture is defined. So in cases where the picture is dynamically generated or like added later on, and those are the cases in which you would want to preload that image. You wouldn't necessarily, like, if you're already discovering the picture element and the images inside it, there's no functional difference between loading it and preloading it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think so.
But were you saying, Nicholas, like if you had just a picture element with only links in it and no images? Like you would actually have the picture element twice or something, I guess? One of them would be link rel preloads only, and the other picture element would be the actual images later.
Or possibly a hidden picture element, assuming that it would still preload, assuming you could hint that it won't be hidden at some point, possibly.
Yeah, I mean, I guess in that case, picture element just becomes a link. So maybe it's better to just have a link that has source set.
Yeah. One more thing to bear in mind here is that whatever we come up with also needs to work in the header format of link. So maybe instead of an ID that will require us to have some sort of a cache that maintains state across different elements or different headers, maybe it makes sense to just have a not type attribute with some better name that, yeah, so basically saying this is an AVIF, but don't load it if you support WebP or the other way around, whatever. Basically provide a way for people to express the actual conditions under which they want to preload or not preload this resource.
But then if you want to preload, JPEG, WebP, and AVIF, then you have to have the not clause, say not and not.
Yeah. You will have to say, yeah, load this AVIF only, yeah, load this AVIF if you support AVIF, load this WebP if you don't support AVIF, and load this JPEG if you don't support neither AVIF nor WebP.
Right.
And I agree that it's potentially cumbersome, but it enables us to like maintain the logic to a single preload link rather than
Yeah, I mean, what you just said sounds more like a header where you say, put the preload priority in this order. Then you would only have to do it once.
Yeah. Potentially. Yeah. Maybe it's yeah. Worthwhile to like I guess the main conclusion I have is that we need to explore this space more. I don't think that like there are multiple possible sketches. None of them is ideal. Maybe we should like take that to the issue and discuss it further there. Does that make sense for folks, especially given that we're at time? Okay. Cool. With that, we covered all the issues we had on the agenda. So great work, everyone. And I will see you all in 2 weeks minus a day.
Sounds good. Thank you. Thank you, Michael, for helping scribe too.